we're going to invite each of the politicians we have here today to deliver approximately 60 seconds about yourself, an opening statement, starting with Kevin Brennan for Labour.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us all here today to be on BOL radio before the election and providing some dry activities for us on what must be one of the wettest days of the year for those of us who've been out campaigning today. So we're very appreciative of that. I got involved in politics purely and simply because I believe in the possibility of change for the better. And change for the better can happen, but it can only happen when people get together and campaign for it and work for it. And that's why I've been involved in politics since I was a young person, both in school, at university. Then I had a career in education and then came into politics and have been fortunate enough to be the Member of Parliament for Cardiff West since 2001, the Labour Member of Parliament, following on from the late Rhodri Morgan, who was my predecessor as the MP. This election finds us, I think, at a really significant crossroads in our history as a United Kingdom, as Wales, as the city of Cardiff. And there are some real and very stark choices to be made about the future direction of the country following the vote that was had last year on Brexit. Are we to be a less equal, less tolerant, more closed to the world country than we've been in the past? Or are we to be open? Are we to be more equal? Are we to be a country that believes in sharing the wealth that we create in a fairer way? And that is the choice ahead of us at this election.
Your time. Alex Meredith for Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for organising this. It really is a great pleasure to be here. I love elections, and the general election is the most exciting election that we do as a country. A national decision, 40 million odd people go into the polls, and each one has their own reasons for voting in the way that they're going to vote, their own individual circumstances, their own ideas. And all those people who are listening who will be voting need to come to their own personal decision about why they want to vote in a certain way. There's lots of complications. Are you voting for a leader? Are you voting for a local MP? Are you voting for Welsh issues? Are you voting for national issues? But there's one issue that I think will govern much of the future of your lives and my life, and that will be our relationship with Europe. For all of my life, I've enjoyed the prosperity and the safety and security that has come from being as part of the European Union, and that place has never been questioned. Just in the last 12 months, we've seen that change, and that change will go through knock-on effects for generations to come, and your generation will feel it more keenly than mine, but we will all suffer. So our position as Liberal Democrats is we need to look at the terms of the deal as we come out of the European Union and have another look at whether we believe that's the right place for our country to be. I will be campaigning to stay in. I believe passionately in our position in the European Union. I believe it's in our interests as a group to stay in for Cardiff, for Wales and for the United Kingdom. So I will keep up that fight, and I got into politics to fight for a better world, and I think our better place is in the European Union. So if you believe in that, then put your cross next to the Liberal Democrats, and we will try and deliver it for you.
Thank you, Michael Dean for Plaid Cymru.
Yes, I'd like to echo the sentiments as well, and thank you all guys for inviting us here today. I think, this election is going to go down in history as being the Brexit election, is what we're going to remember this election for. And now more than ever, we need a strong voice to represent us in Westminster to ensure Wales's needs are met during these negotiation processes. We also need an MP that's going to stand up for us and vote on the issues that really matter. Unfortunately, Mr Brennan, his record hasn't been very good up until now, missing 6 out of the 7 key Brexit votes. But like in Scotland, Wales... Rubbish. Sorry, I know there is a fact checker, so if you want to go on theyworkforyou.com, you can actually get that information. But like in Scotland, Wales needs a strong block of MPs to fight for its people. We don't need a majority, we simply need a mandate to go to Westminster and to hold the Tory government to account. Time and time again, the Tories show us little respect in Wales for our culture, our way of life. I've seen firsthand how the relentless austerity regime has impacted some of the most vulnerable in our society. And as your Plaid Cymru MP, I'm going to go to Westminster, respect Wales, fight for our communities and defend them from this Tory regime.
Thank you very much, Michael Dean. For the Conservatives, David Melding.
Well, can I start by saying I think we should all be united and defend democratic values. We've seen in the last few weeks and the last few days in particular those that are prepared to attack our society and regrettably murder our fellow citizens. So I think this election demonstrates to those that would undermine us that we do stand firm and that we do have democratic ways of sorting out our challenges and our difficulties, and we base our society on the free and fair choices that people make. Now, those choices are a range of options, and as a Conservative, I believe that we need fundamentally a strong economy. That economy will have to respond to the challenges and opportunities of Brexit. I'm sure that subject will come up in the debate. And a strong economy, first and foremost, creates the wealth to have effective, efficient public services and a welfare system that supports everyone in need, and we're all potentially in need at some point, even if we don't draw on that at any particular time. And I think we should aim for an even more fair society, one that rewards work and keeps taxation at a reasonable minimum and has generational fairness. I'm particularly keen to talk about how young people can get a better deal, for example, by increasing the number of houses we're now building, which then may be in place when today's young people will be needing family homes, for instance.
Thank you very much. Now, before we move on to the first question, Kevin Brennan, would you like to respond to the claim that you're...
Yes, I would, because it's an insult to the intelligence of the politics students and young people that are here who know full well that when you vote in the House of Commons, you do so by division, and therefore you don't register an abstention, unless you do the very odd thing of voting both for and against a division, which, by the way, people would make a lot of mischief of if you chose to do that. In the 7 votes that Michael refers to, which I could quote them all, but from 2011 to 2016, I abstained on 6 out of the 7 and voted in 1. The leader of the Plaid Cymru group in Parliament abstained on 6 out of the 7 and voted in 1 of the 7 votes. But presumably Michael is now criticising the leader of his own parliamentary group for being absent from Parliament. We were there, and he should be very careful not to make accusations he knows are not true when he knows, as a Member of Parliament, that I was present on those occasions.
So if you go on theworkforyou.com, it records obviously all of the parliamentary votes there. There's 4 possible options, and abstention is actually an option.
And all the information on that website is taken from the Public Whip, which is the official website, which explains quite clearly, as you know, Michael, and as any politics student would know, that you cannot count those as somebody not being present, and there's an actual caveat health warning put on the website that you choose to ignore because you like to sling mud rather than debate the issues positively. You are slinging mud, and you are slinging mud. Why aren't you slinging mud at your own leader then?
Informing people
of your voting record. If you
let me respond, I'll get it.
So why aren't
informing people of your voting record is not mud slinging. It's
which
not
is
running
identical
a
to the
campaign.
leader of your group.
It's showing the public. Whatever constituency you're standing in, it's letting people know exactly how their MP has been voting.
Okay.
People don't want to know how MPs have been voting elsewhere in the country. They want to know how their MP in Cardiff West has voted. They want to know the truth, not black propaganda. I've given you the truth. And once again, you sat there and said that I need to be careful of what I'm saying, essentially threatening me with whatever action you want to take. But I've got the facts. If you're, like I said, go on theworkforyou.com. It's all there. Abstentions are recorded on that website, so please look at the facts.
Right. I will now read out the votes in question, since Michael's challenged my integrity. The transfer of powers in 2011, the national referendum 2011, the Queen's speech 2013, second reading 2013, clause 1 2013, European referendum bill 2014, second reading 2015, third reading 2015, the referendum debate 2016. In 6 out of 7 of those votes, I abstained, and I voted on the Queen's speech when in 2013. In 6 out of 7 of those votes, Howell Williams, the leader of Plaid Cymru in Parliament, also abstained, with one difference. He voted on the national referendum one, not on the one in 2013. It really is a pitiful insult to the intelligence of young people here that you should go down this path, and you really ought to be ashamed of yourself, Michael, and start engaging in some positive...
Like I said, look at it for yourselves, guys. Go on the website and check the facts. That's all I'm saying. Go and do your research.
Can we move on, please? Moving on to the first question, which is on the subject of Brexit, from Kieran Morgan.
How would you personally like to see Brexit, the negotiations enacted, and what does a successful Britain outside the European Union look like to you?
We came to Kevin first last time, so Alex.
Well, I think not as has been proposed by Theresa May, and the way that she's taken it forward so far has been deeply discouraging, depressing, and I think damaging for the UK so far. So my approach would have been, had I been her, having knowing that she's a Remainer, that she actually believed in many ways that we should stay in the European Union, would have been to set up a cross-party group, bring in the people who know what they're doing, the people who understand Europe and understand the process that we're about to undertake, and started working together to bring in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, people, experts, frankly, like my own former party leader, Nick Clegg, who understand the positions, people from the Labour Party, people from all over our communities who understand business, etc., and brought a group together that could take this forward for our country. Instead, she makes speeches on the steps of the House of Commons accusing people who are our friends and partners of undermining our processes and causing problems for us, when in fact we're going to go and need to make deals with those people that work both ways. So I believe we've done huge damage to our position already. But we can resolve this if whoever takes charge next brings a more collegiate approach, talks to the European Union as adults, works together, collaborates, respects, all the things that people, even in any context of life, understand that when you need to do a deal with someone, you need to earn their respect, you need to work together. And we can do that as British people, and we can still get a decent result. But what I would say is that no Brexit is a good Brexit. No deal we can get is better than the deal we currently have. And therefore, even if we can make progress and make some arrangements that work, we should still come back and ask the people, do they think that what has been achieved is better than what we have today? And I believe they will say no. And if people think they'll say yes, why be scared of that vote? Simple truth is, if people believe that we can get a better deal, why not put it to the British people? Let's see what we think. And in that case, I think we'll see a very interesting outcome.
Michael Dean.
Personally, I get Alex's position, but I think we need to move on from that vote now. Plaid Cymru accepts the result of the referendum. We did campaign to remain within the EU, but we've accepted that now, and we're looking forward as how we go forward in the negotiations. For us, a good result in these negotiations would be, or an essential result really, would be to have tariff-free access to the single market. I think that's absolutely critical to so many sectors within Wales, and I think that's the number one thing that we need to ensure. Obviously, maintain the EU funds, whether it be structural funds or grants that we already receive as a country. The Tories have said they're going to keep them in place until 2022, but do I trust them to keep that on beyond? I probably don't, actually, with the amount of U-turns that has already gone on in this election process. But they are key to so many industries in Wales. We're also calling to stop a power grab from Westminster. So when the laws that are currently exercised in the EU, which are actually devolved to Cardiff Bay, come back to the UK. We want to ensure that they go to the Bay and they don't go to Westminster. But also, I think there's going to be some opportunities to come out of Brexit. I think we should look at the positive opportunities going forward. Look at the Champions League final this weekend. The eyes of the world were on Cardiff, and we put on a fantastic show. And I think we as a country need to be sort of looking to the future now and putting Wales on the map.
Wait till they need to get visas to get here. They'll be a bit different then. As far as moving within the EU, I think we're going to be in a good place come the end of the negotiations. But I think we need to look forward and look at the best deal we can get for this country.
Thanks very much, David Melding.
Well, I'm very confident that we will get a good deal, because I think the European Union will be reasonable in recognising that's important for them as well. Europe's not going to go away, Britain's not going to go away. We need a strong and fair relationship that does need to be based on tariff-free access and quota-free access, and we will, obviously our markets will be open to them on that basis. So I think that is achievable. It's important that we remain strong allies in many areas, though our relationship will obviously be based on us not being members. We will be partners on security and defence issues, and probably will want to make agreements on environmental matters specifically between Britain and the European Union as well. So there will continue to be lots of areas where we will cooperate. And the European Union is going through a process of reform, and I think we should do our bit to support that where they do want to go forward, and we should wish them well in that, because I think the European Union will now start to deepen some of its political integration, which was always a bit further than they could go when we were full members. So I think there'll be lots of changes, lots of needs on both sides, and that should create the dynamic for a solid relationship in the future.
Thank you very much. So first off, sorry, we haven't come.
Thank you. Well, first of all, we're having this utterly unnecessary election, which has wasted 2 months of the negotiating process over Article 50. But once we get beyond that, what should be happening? Well, 3 clear things should be happening. One is that those European Union citizens who've settled in this country, made their lives here, many of whom are my constituents, should already have had their status guaranteed in this country. There are people living out there in great uncertainty and great anxiety, I can tell you, because they come to see me about their situation, and the government has decided to use them as bargaining chips in the negotiation over our exiting from the European Union. I think that is unethical and immoral, that the government's taken that position, because what are they saying? At the end of the day, if they don't get the deal they want, that they're still going to exclude these people from the United Kingdom. It is a absolutely immoral position that they've taken on that. Secondly, the funding that previously was coming to Wales from the European Union sources should be guaranteed by the government. They failed to do that into the long term, because there's a lot of money spent in this constituency through European structural funds and other sources from the European Union, and we should be making sure, and whoever is elected as the MP for this area should be pledging to make sure that every penny of that money gets spent back here in Wales and in Cardiff. And thirdly, as others have said, it's absolutely essential that we negotiate good access to the single market for the economic future of our country.
Kieran, do you feel your question's been answered?
Yes.
So David Melding, is the government using EU citizens as bargaining chips?
Well, no, the British government, through diplomatic circles, approached the Commission to see if the first element of our new relationship could be mutual recognition of citizens' rights, and we were told very firmly that no negotiations could start. So our only option then would have been to make a unilateral declaration on the rights of EU citizens in Britain without any reciprocal arrangements being guaranteed for UK citizens in the EU. And I don't think that was a reasoned basis to proceed, but Britain did want to come up with that agreement in advance of the more general agreement on our economic relationship, and it is unfortunate that that was not possible.
In my view, that would have been the right thing to do, and knowing David as I do, I'm quite surprised he doesn't think that would have been the right thing to do, actually, because it would have got the negotiations off in the right direction. Having said that, personally, I think that the speech that the Prime Minister made at Lancaster House, setting out her vision, or lack of vision really, for Britain outside the European Union, is one of the reasons why I voted against triggering Article 50 at the time, because I think it's a vision that lacks any true plan for the future. If she's seriously considering us crashing out of the EU with no deal being better than the kind of deal that could be negotiated in good faith, then I think that's a serious error.
And I think also, just to add, I think the Conservatives are trying to pull the wool over people's eyes here, because actually the whole process from where Theresa May is sitting is all about creating an enemy in Europe. What she wants to achieve is to say, look at those Europeans, it happened in the referendum as well, aren't they terrible? They keep telling us what to do. Us plucky Brits are going to go and try our best, because they know that eventually we're going to get a bad deal out of this, and there's going to be a huge blame game. People will say, how has this happened? How come we've got no access or limited access to the single market? Why are companies leaving our shores? Why are our citizens getting poorer? And the reality is they will turn around and say, those naughty Europeans, they never played fair with us, and look how terrible they are, and we will be sent off into isolationism. Now, the reality is, as Kevin says, Britain could stand up tall in this negotiation and say, I believe that European citizens are members of our country, legitimate members, we give them right to stay, and start the process with that kind of level of respect and tone, and it would make a huge difference. But no, we'll be we'll be playing the blame game for the next 10 years while we try and fight out whether Juncker's doing this to our system or some other bureaucrats doing that. And it's a dreadful position for Britain to be in. The Conservatives see it to their own advantage.
Well, I think a government, plays in the real world, and these sort of vague, idealistic pleas about how you can negotiate are not really going to survive when you get down to the real points of negotiation.
So when are we going to see your real points then, David?
What happened with Juncker leaking, or his aide leaking, the details of confidential negotiations at Number 10 was very damaging. Even the German government thought it was outrageous conduct. Now, I think we are through that, and I think things will settle down, because it is vastly in everyone's interest to have a good deal. Obviously, we don't want a bad deal, and we think no deal is better than a bad deal. But what is by far the best option, which everyone realises, is that we all get a good deal. But negotiations are tough. They're never easy. I mean, what's happening is there's no great difference to what you see in other processes of international negotiation. You get turbulence at the beginning, then people settle down, and then they make the deal as long as they are reasonable in their expectations and their requirements and demands. And you would not expect our government to go in there and play low in terms of what we should be getting out of the new relationship we'll have for the next generation or so with the EU. You want someone who is tough and fair, and I know that Theresa May is going to deliver that much more ably than anyone else who's on offer to be Prime Minister.
Ben Roberts.
So a lot of you have talked about campaigning on a platform of achieving tariff-free access to the EU. That is one of the concrete things that a lot of parties, I think perhaps all of your parties have been putting forward as what they want to achieve. But it seems to have been fairly clear that we can't achieve full access to the single market without also accepting freedom of movement. So how does that weigh up in your parties and in your opinions? At what point would you accept freedom of movement? How much movement would you be willing to accept? Because one of the big issues has been in financial services. Because even if we can achieve tariff-free access to goods, financial services, it would be much harder to achieve a tariff-free deal on and to get passporting rights. So just where does that weigh up in your opinions and in your party's opinions?
Michael Dean.
I think we need free movement of people. I think immigration brings some real positive elements to our economy, society. I mean, we need that movement of people to continue. And what we're talking about is a regional visa system for Wales. So we would actually look at the needs of our economy, look at various sort of elements and grant visas to actually suit our needs and to help boost our economy. We would, of course, recognise the rights of all EU citizens already remaining here, and we would give those the right to remain. But we would look to say, right, we need this many doctors, this many workers to work in our agricultural sector, for example, and would say we're going to grant the visas based on that need for our economy.
But that's not quite freedom of movement, and that was one of the driving factors behind the decision on Brexit. One of the big campaign issues was immigration, the feeling that lots of unskilled European workers were coming here and driving down wages. So how would you be happy to accept freedom of movement, even though that seems to be not what the British public had voted for?
Yeah, I mean, when we come out of EU, we are going to have to relinquish that full freedom of movement that we've known up until now. But what we're saying is we still want to be able to encourage people to come to the UK, to work, to start lives and families here. We want to be welcoming. We want to be an open society, and we don't want to put those barriers up to stop people from coming here.
If we don't have freedom of movement, it seems unlikely that we'll be able to get tariff-free access to the single market.
I don't think so. I think we can still push for tariff-free access, and even though we are coming out.
Well, I mean, I think you put your finger, Ben, on one of the trickiest parts of the negotiation, if we're absolutely frank about it. You're right, that the implication of leaving the European Union in this instance means that we're no longer members of the single market in the way that we previously were. Now, there are other statuses available that other countries have who are not technically members of the European Union, but yet enjoy a good relationship. But that does involve, obviously, having to accept. You can't just join. You can't just leave the club and then expect to come in through the back door and drink at the bar for nothing, which is what some people seem to think. Some of the Brexiteers seem to think is the kind of deal that might be on offer. So it's going to be a key part of our negotiation. I think that we should be aiming for as full access as we can to the single market in the negotiations if we are going down this pathway of leaving the European Union. And I also think that whatever final deal is negotiated, that there should be a meaningful vote on it. Now, in our manifesto, it says about a meaningful vote in Parliament. I've taken a slightly different view of my own party over this, over the Article 50 triggering, and my own view is, should there be a strong revulsion at the deal from people when they see what's actually on offer at the end of the process, that we shouldn't rule out the possibility of asking people again for their views, because I think ultimately the people should have the right to change their minds if they really don't like the detail of what they see, because in the course of the debate on the referendum, there was a lot of misinformation, there were a lot of generalities spoken about, and there were a lot of claims made by those who wanted us to leave the European Union that, quite frankly, don't bear any scrutiny.
I mean, that's music to my ears, certainly, and I think it's always pleasing to see politicians sort of reaching across political divides and taking up positions that other parties are adopting. And I think there's a lot of people in the Labour Party who share Kevin's view that the Liberal Democrats have the right position on the European Union. But I think what upsets me about this is this is a tragedy. Free movement is a wonderful gift. I've enjoyed it. I know so many people who have. We in the UK are beneficiaries of free movement in that we can move ourselves, and people come to this country freely to share our livelihoods too. Now, I feel like there's a situation here where we should be standing on the top of bridges shouting, you can take us out of the EU, but you'll never take our freedom. But the reality is, this is the first time I think I could ever imagine that a country will take itself down a process whereby it robs its citizens of freedoms. And we must fight against that. We must stand up against that. Because ultimately, if we are all sitting here in 10 years' time saying, right, now I've got less ability to do things that people might, so I went on Erasmus schemes, I've obviously enjoyed free movement in other contexts and worked abroad. Why can't people in the future enjoy that? That's the process of humanity, is starting to allow more and better understanding and knowledge of different cultures through movement of people. And the reality is, people like to characterise the EU as a trading system. It's not. It's a system that was set up by European nations to allow engagement at an economic level, at a political level, at a social level. And we have benefited from that. And to imagine that you only get corporations benefiting from trade and the citizens have to suffer borders and visas and restrictions is a dreadful position for us to take. Now, people can say, well, the referendum was about immigration. We need, in politics, to start leading that debate a bit more towards the direction which I believe in, which is the benefits of immigration and the benefits to our citizens of free movement. And the Liberal Democrats will always take the lead in that debate.
David Melding, should there be a second referendum on the deal?
Well, there's no purpose in having a second referendum. We know the referendum result, and we now have to negotiate the best terms for our new relationship. But I mean, that relationship will be as us outside the European Union. To do anything, I was a firm Remainer, incidentally. I campaigned very hard for the Remain case. But the damage we would do to our democratic system if we tried to overturn that fundamental constitutional choice with a second referendum is massive. And it shouldn't, it's not an easy option, and those that are suggesting it, I think, need to reflect.
But why, if it was a good
well,
deal,
let me
would
finish,
they say
please.
no?
Let me
That's
finish.
interesting.
It's obviously an attempt to undermine the first referendum. I think for the future relationship and freedom of movement, It doesn't seem to me possible to base our future relationship on that, because it was a core part of what those that wanted to leave voted on. It is possible to have a relationship with the EU that's not based on that. In fact, tariff-free access has been given in free trade agreements by the EU to countries around the world. Now, it is true they are much more distant than we are from the EU, and therefore, freedom of movement is not particularly relevant. Whereas it's obviously a live option for someone to come from Eastern Europe or Belgium or whatever into our economy. But I think in terms of right to work in certain sectors, that's a much more profitable line for us to go down. And I do see the possibility of having fairly generous quotas in many areas of the economy where we would want an interchange between people who go from the UK to work in Germany, Italy, wherever, and for their citizens to come into the UK economy. I don't think that's going to be a great problem. So, but at the end of the day, there could be much more opportunities than we realize. It's not strictly a binary choice. It is possible that will come at some cost to us, though, and that will be reflected in the deal we get. It may be more on the quotas we will be given rather than the actual tariffs. And then there's the whole wider question of how we accept the EU's rule setting for access to their market. I mean, I think that actually is a much bigger issue, really.
I just wonder, David, if you're worried at all that there are elements within the Conservative Party for whom no deal will look as anything other than a betrayal, and who will ultimately just always turn around and say, we shouldn't be negotiating, we shouldn't be compromising, we shouldn't be, paying our share of anything that we've previously committed to, and that they want us really just to crash out under World Trade Organization rules and have a kind of, laissez-faire, very naked in tooth and claw, capitalist type free trade society with the rest of the world under World Trade Organization rules, rather than the sort of negotiation which I think you're talking about, hope would be the outcome.
Well, Kevin, the Prime Minister has emphasised that we need a strong and deep relationship with the EU, and I don't think that's very subtle code for we're overwhelmingly in favour of a good deal, which has to be fair to both sides. There's a challenge here because obviously the EU is losing one of its largest states, and there's a challenge to us that we do take a certain leap into the unknown with the new relationship we're going to enter. So there's perhaps a little bit of fear on both sides, but I think we work through that and we get to a reasonable position. And on questions like whatever ongoing commitments are fairly assessed, then obviously we have to honour those. And I don't think reasonable people will have a problem with that. But when you have the minutes of a confidential meeting leaked all over a German newspaper, or some Eurocrat saying that the divorce bill, i.e. the bill just to leave the EU, to have the right to secede, is 110 billion euros. This is silly politics and it's not helpful. And it's right for the British government to stand firm against that nonsense.
Mike Dean, should there be a second referendum on the deal?
I have had this conversation with friends over a pint on a couple of occasions, it's fair to say. I'm of the position I'm sticking with the party that we're not going to have another vote. Initially, I was of the thinking that sort of this time next year we could have a vote on the sort of terms we want to take forward, and if we had an idea of where the negotiations were going at that point, and we'd do it very similar to the model they use in America when they make constitutional amendments. But no, I've sort of been talked down by other members in the party now. I think we're happy with where we're at, and we just need to look forward.
Alex Meredith, is a second referendum on the deal an attempt to undermine the first referendum?
Absolutely not. It's a different question, completely different question. The question put to us last year was, do you want to start a journey? Do you want to take a step forward into what is, as we now see, the unknown? And the answer came back surprisingly to a lot of people, mostly me, that people did want to take that step, and that's fine. The question now is, where do you want to go? Where's your destination? Where's the end point? And I think people should have a question asked again as to whether they're happy with that endpoint. It's a bit like, if you go through a process of selling a house, you might be asked at the first day, are you going to sell? You say, well, yeah, I'll put the house up for sale. Off you go, put the sign up, there you go. And the idea that then someone comes back to you 2 years later with a new house already bought, already signed and sealed, done. You get no choice where it is, what it looks like, what size it is, whether it's drafty, whether it's got a garden, whatever. You've just got to move. You've got no second choice. I think is ridiculous. I mean, we could be in a situation in 2 years, and it won't take 2 years, it'll take 10 years. We could be in a situation where we have a fundamentally different economy, a fundamentally different set of rights, and a fundamentally different set of values, essentially, as a country. And we will then be told, well, actually, whoever it is, the Westminster politicians are signing that on our behalf, no questions asked. That's not good enough for me. If we had the choice to leave, we must also have the responsibility to look at the last deal. And I put this to the Conservatives in that if there was a scenario where Theresa May, or whoever it is, has a complete change of personality, realises the falsehood that Ben identified, that if you want access to the single market, you have to accept freedom of movement, goes to Brussels and signs a deal that accepts freedom of movement on those terms, do you think that those conservative Eurosceptics are going to take that on the chin and go, well, that's fine, free movement, no problem? Of course they're going to want to vote on that. Everyone's going to want to have a look at this deal, and there will be compromises that they may or may not like, and it's right that the British people should have the final say.
There should certainly be a meaningful, sorry Dave, there should certainly be a meaningful vote in Parliament. Whether there's another referendum or not, I think it would depend, there'd have to be a strong public demand for it. But there's no logic to there not being in David's position. I mean, by the same logic, you might say that this general election, 2 years after the last general election called by Theresa May, is an attempt to undermine the result of the last general election, which we only held 24 months ago. I mean, there's no logic to that. But if there was a demand for it, I think it would be wrong to deny that demand if it was there. However, if there isn't a demand for it, and it's clear that public opinion, wants to move on with regard to the deal after a meaningful vote in Parliament, then that's what will happen.
I don't think we should fool anyone that a second referendum, i.e. do you accept the deal to leave or do you reject it, is a yes or no to whether you want to be in the EU. Because if you reject the deal, you remain in the EU. So it is rerunning the first referendum. Now, all this should have been discussed before the referendum was held. If people had great problems with resolving constitutional issues by use of a referendum, it should have been discussed then. It wasn't. All the major parties supported the referendum. So I'd come back to my basic point. We would cause great damage to our democracy if we now reneged on it. The only slight justification for a second referendum is if Kevin's scenario did occur, where you had an overwhelming desire amongst the British people to rethink, and that was quite clearly and manifestly expressed with marches, demonstrations, petitions, where you had 75-80% of the population demanding a second vote. Then he's right. I mean, then the analogy of a general election is a reasonable one. But we're not remotely close to that territory. In fact, the opinion has probably firmed a bit against the EU. So I think we have to face the future as it is, I would ideally wish we were in a different place, but we're not, and we have to move on.
Thank you very much. That was the topic of Brexit. Next up, we're going to be moving on to a question from Ben Roberts. Remember, you can get in touch with us, email us radiostation@bishoplandleft.org or tweet us at BOLHS_radio. Use the hashtag BOLGE17 to let us know what you think. Ben, your pre-prepared question, please.
So, in the 2017 general election, Jeremy Corbyn has brought to the forefront of politics the question of nationalisation. I mean, it hasn't been such a big issue for quite a long time. So, I'd just like to hear your opinions on renationalisation of the key industries that Jeremy Corbyn has suggested should be nationalised under his government, such as water, rail, national grid. Maybe starting with Kevin, who can set out that policy.
I'm happy to respond to that. I mean, first of all, interestingly, in Wales, of course, we have not a nationalised but a mutualised water industry already, because, and I was involved a little bit in this when it happened, when Western Power Distribution took over Hyder, which was the previous company which did own the privatised water stock, they spun out the water company, and we got it into a mutual vehicle, which means it's run in the public interest, not for profit. And what that means is that you can, instead of having to borrow money on the stock exchange and to be answerable to shareholders and provide huge levels of profits in order to invest in the infrastructure, which is the water industry, which is a natural monopoly. To be honest with you, you don't have several pipes, running into your house for you to choose whether you want, Tesco water, or whether you want Sainsbury water, or whether you want Virgin water in your house. It's a natural monopoly. It means that they can actually go out into the market and borrow money extremely cheaply in the forms of issuing bonds, which give you a very long-term cheap rate of interest and a very, very inexpensive way of borrowing. Why can you do that? Because water is literally the type of industry that provides a stream of income, sorry about the pun, into the future, a guaranteed stream of income, because people will be paying their water bills into the future. So therefore you can borrow in the long term, and it's a long-term industry. It's about infrastructure, it's about pipes, it's about all of the engineering works that's required. And the industries that Labour's talking about putting into a public ownership model, whichever way that is done, are those sorts of industries where they are natural monopolies, whether you're talking about the railways, whether you're talking about creating an energy company, at least to compete with current energy companies and to keep them honest. And I think there's plenty of evidence that there are real problems with the Tory privatisations of the 80s and 90s, which took these industries out of public ownership. They all do need, what I would add is what's needed in addition to the old model to keep them honest, if you like, in a way, is a strong regulator and strong regulation, because of course you don't have the City of London and the profit motive of the stock exchange holding you to account. So in order to make sure they're efficient, they do need a strong regulatory framework.
Thank you very much. Alex Murder.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary debate that we're having in 2017. I have to say, this really does, it surprised me. I should be transparent and say I work in renewable energy, and so I work for an electricity company. So this time next week I might be a civil servant. It's quite an odd feeling. And certainly in my company and amongst the people I work with in the electricity business, it's come out of nowhere, really. I mean, there is an argument and a discussion to be had around the right structures for certain assets, and I think it's a highly complicated discussion that takes each in turn, and they are different. So as Kevin's rightly said, the water industry's got a particular set of circumstances. Rail has very different circumstances. We own the rail track anyway, more or less, as a nation, and it's then about train companies. Electricity is highly complicated with lines and then generators and the micro generation that's going on in this country, and to me it's just the wrong priority, frankly. And so for the amount, so there could be, step by step, a sort of conversation that goes along the lines of, well, let's talk about rail, off we go. Let's talk about, certain aspects of the water industry, and perhaps we could go on that journey. But to put it out there, as the Labour Party have, it's like, right, next Parliament, we're nationalising the whole lot. Billions of pounds, huge amounts of money being thrown at essentially the city to buy it back. To me, that's the wrong priority. What we should be doing is setting out a series of perhaps consultations, discussions around different industries, and seeing whether or not there is appetite for the public to spend that sort of money on that sort of infrastructure. My personal view is that a free market is the best place for a lot of these industries to be run. I work with people who used to work for the Electricity Board when it was nationalised. They're still in the company, and their mindset and their approach to doing the work that we do is very different from people who've come from innovative small companies with new ideas.
But isn't it bizarre though in some ways that a lot of these assets are nationalised? They're just owned by foreign nationalised industries, and in the UK they are banned by legislation from being owned by public entities. So whatever the extent of the level of public ownership that would be appropriate, I think the current structure that we have is wrong. I think it's ironic that the Eastern Rail franchise, which had to be taken into public ownership temporarily because of its failure to deliver its service and because it couldn't make a profit, was actually run more efficiently and at a profit in public hands. But the government, it's so ideologically against the idea of public ownership that it's handed it back into the private sector. And often those private sector entities are heavily invested in and owned by foreign governments. So they're effectively nationalised, but lying in foreign hands.
Yeah.
Can we hear from Michael Dean, please?
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw this policy come out, I was actually really in favour of it, and it is something that I've believed in since I was a youngster. I always sort of had a lot of time for sort of nationalisation. I also found it strange that sort of Welsh Labour had distanced themselves so far from a lot of Corbyn's ideas. I think some of the stuff he's come out with in his manifesto are really sort of really exciting, really progressive, and actually can really benefit the country. And I couldn't see why Welsh Labour was so far away from that position. I think it's over needed. Railway in particular, I think the services are actually absolutely creaking at the moment, and I think nationalising the rail and actually putting some decent investment and doing some work there, and not having private companies taking a profit out of this, it would actually really improve the service. I mean, how long have we been waiting for the electrification of the line here? It's dreadful that we've had to wait for so long to see the improvements that we desperately need.
That's Network Rail that is actually already in public hands.
Yeah, I mean, we could see a much better infrastructure network in Wales if it was nationalised and if the right investments and the right work were actually done there. With regards to the water, again, yeah, I'd like to go further and see those powers devolve to the Assembly as well, because I think we should have power over our natural resources, and I think the day when Wales does have power over the water industry and be able to set rates, I think financially that's going to give a really big boost to the economy in Wales. And I'm a firm believer, as I am a nationalist, that yes, we should be able to control our natural resources. So yeah, fully in favour of a lot of the stuff Jeremy Corbyn's talking about, and yeah, I think we should go forward.
No, I think, well, you won't be surprised that I think as a Conservative that free enterprise and innovation is the best model for most economic activity. But I do think in what otherwise would be industries that would tend towards a monopoly position, you need effective regulation. And we have actually, in our manifesto, come up with some ideas around the sort of rail ticketing and setting fair prices for rail journeys there, and a cap on electricity prices. So, I mean, there does need to be some government activity where the free market cannot regulate effectively. I think, those that want more social involvement in the economy are far better off concentrating on cooperative models, local innovation and enterprises, which sometimes can extend to small generation projects, for example, in the energy field. And I think that would be a much more productive way to go and to encourage. And generally, that type of approach also gets cross-party support. So I think perhaps that's part of the economy where a lot of people, on the margin, those that we sometimes call the left behinds, would benefit from more cooperative enterprise in society.
There's a question, about competence I just wanted to add, and I think it is important that we keep it in mind, where you've got a situation where there's a leader who can't even run his own shadow cabinet telling us that he wants to run the full utility suite. I mean, I think that is a problem, is that when we have...
I don't think he was planning to run it himself, actually, in fairness.
Then who will he...
Slight exaggeration.
Who will he appoint when he couldn't even persuade you to stay on board? How is he going to find people to work in his... I've
been on the front bench for the last year. Yeah,
well, I mean, people have come and gone, it's hard to keep track, but I do feel like there's a level of incompetence.
Pay attention.
There's a level of... it is hard, I mean, I tell you. There's a level of incompetence within the current Labour Party, which suggests to me that if they were to take hold of big national infrastructure, we would see them run into the ground quite quickly.
Well, look, the Labour Party is not going to be running the national infrastructure. That's a ludicrous...
Well, nationalisation
involves taking it into public ownership, not being run by a political party.
Kevin, first, can we just talk about... So, even if nationalisation was the right idea in the long term, one of the points that Alex made was that it was a huge cost and not the right priority right now. It looks like it's going to cost more than £100 billion to buy back all of the industries that Corbyn has suggested that he will buy back. So are you not concerned about the cost?
Well, whatever the cost is, the manner in which you take these things into public ownership is through the issuing of bonds in lieu of shares to the city, which is a very, very long-term investment. And in my view, that doesn't necessarily have to impact greatly in the short term on the public purse. You're talking about a long-term investment in infrastructure, taking an asset into public ownership, which generates a future stream of income. So it's no different, than taking out a mortgage on your house in that respect, or taking out a mortgage on an asset, which generates an income to the future. Where Alex is right is if they were badly run, then you'd have a problem, and they would have to be well run and properly regulated. But I think there's very good evidence that the current model we have in some of these areas is not being run very well, and actually the deal that the public's getting out of, in some cases, particularly with some of the rail companies, is a very bad one indeed.
I mean, I think increasing the national debt by £125 billion, say,
if you're borrowing to waste money, that's one thing. But if you're borrowing in order to invest in infrastructure, that's a different thing altogether. And that's the problem with the figures that the Conservative Party come up with, is they don't distinguish between borrowing around current expenditure and borrowing in relation to long-term capital investment. And they do it deliberately in order to create these very high headline figures, but it's a completely different notion. So if you borrowed to go out for a night out in Cardiff, that's one thing. But if you're borrowing in order to pay for your education, to build your human capital for the future, that's ultimately a very different thing altogether.
Thank you very much. And with that, we need to move on to our next topic. So that was the economy. We're moving on to some conversation about social policy. And for this question, we're going to hand over to Sharon Mandika. Keep your messages coming in at BOLHS_radio on Twitter. Hashtag BOLGE17.
So throughout this election campaign, there's been a lot of discussion around the opportunities that should be available to young people under the next government. And my main question is, what would your party do to ensure that every young person in the country has access to a valuable education, irrespective of their socio-economic background?
Michael Dean.
I think it is so important now to make investments so the young people can have the education that they deserve and will in future benefit this country. I think what we've talked about, obviously student loans and university fees have been in the headlines a lot recently. We're looking at a grant that's available to all youngsters, but it'll be more of a means-tested grant to enable people to access further education. So we're looking at sort of the highest earner in families would only get £1,000 a year to help towards their tuition fees and the university costs, but the lowest earning families will get up to £9,000 a year. We're also looking at ways to stop the brain drain in Wales, because we've got more Welsh students actually applying to go to university in England than applying in Wales, which is a massive problem to our future as a nation. So we're looking at industries where we really need students to come back and work in Wales. So for example, the NHS, we've got a huge shortage of doctors and nurses. So if you were to go away and study in university and study to be a doctor or be a nurse, we would actually write off 100% of your student fees if you were to come back and work in Wales. And we do that for a number of industries. And it's going along the same lines, again, of looking at what we actually need with regards to our economy and tailoring those grants to be able to attract people to come to Wales. I think there's a lot, it goes a lot further, so vocational places and other types of sort of training are really important. And we've looked at a broader angle of how to be able to deliver those placements using what's already available from the UK government.
David Melding.
I would start, I think, with the higher education sector. And Britain has world-class universities, and I think it's very important that we retain that excellence and ensure our policies enable that. I think traditionally that excellence has been based on the success in research, and we've produced many outstanding scientists and innovators. But I'm not so convinced that our offer to undergraduates has been as good as it should have been. And you go back to the United States, where, after the Second World War, they really did invest in the quality of teaching in universities. I was fortunate enough to attend an American university in the 1980s, and it amazed me how much emphasis was placed on the excellence of teaching. And that has changed quite a bit, but it needs to go further in Britain, and it's more or less changed because of student pressure, because you see the costs of your education and you want to return. And now I think it's ensuring that undergraduates are prepared for the for their careers, the job market. I'd like to see more enterprises in universities, and no matter what your degree, I think some aspect of how you're going to use it in the future, and thinking about the SME sector, for instance, and how you might form with your friends a new idea for a business venture. These sort of things are very, very important. And I'd attach to that the need for investment in vocational education for those that decide not to go down the higher education route. The quality of vocational education is quite variable, and I think that's a very important area to focus on. I want to finish just by saying, it's a bit of a jump, but housing policy is definitely a social policy. One of the main, certainly after the war, with health was one of the main focuses that people had in terms of creating a fairer society. For over 20 years, the United Kingdom, under all parties of those that have been involved in government around the United Kingdom, have not built enough homes. And this has created a very dysfunctional housing market, and it has left us with a distribution of wealth which is really not very healthy. And the way out of that is to build many more houses. So the Conservative manifesto commits to building 1.5 million more houses in England between now and 2022. If we followed that policy in Wales, that would be 75,000 more homes. And I think that is really going to be crucial. It's difficult at your age, when you're thinking of university, to realise how relevant this is and how important it will be in your lives. And most of you will be, having children. And you will need those family homes in your 30s and 40s, and your children, if they don't have access to good quality family housing, will not be brought up in an optimum family housing unit. That's going to really impact them. So I really think politicians need to be challenged. I'm amazed young people don't push us further, asking why we're not releasing more land for development, why we're not building enough houses. The shortfall has been around 40, sometimes even 50% a year. It's an amazing underbuild that we've had in the last generation, and we need to catch up quickly.
Thank you very much. Kevin Brannan.
I think the question wasn't just about people who go to university, which obviously, in terms of the cohort of young people, it's. I think I'm right in saying that's still a minority of individuals who actually go on to university in that particular age group. So I think we mustn't forget schools policy and schools education. And one of the interesting things about being a member of Parliament is that you do see, as a Welsh member of Parliament, you do see the policy differences developing in the different parts of the United Kingdom. And I think the move back by the Conservatives in England towards selection of children aged 11 is an extraordinarily retrograde step to be taken against all the evidence, international evidence from PISA and so on, that the best performing systems do not select people on an academic basis at that age, because in effect it is social selection, and that's clearly shown by the statistics. So I think that's an extremely retrograde step, and I'm glad, I think I'm right in saying that there's a political consensus here in Wales that we shouldn't follow that path. I hope David might be able to confirm, including amongst the Conservatives. In relation to so-called vocational education, I think it's really important we don't forget that in the mix, and David was right to mention that. And I think that's a big challenge for all of us, to make sure that we create the kind of parity that we really should be having between vocational and academic education, because it's been a problem in this country for many, many decades. Having said all that, I do think that the issue of student debt is an issue that preys on people's minds, still is an issue that creates a barrier for people to go into higher education. That's why Labour has committed in England to get rid of tuition fees. We already have the most favourable system in the United Kingdom here in Wales, as administered by the Welsh government, and I'm sure that they will want to look, at following that path should Labour win the election and should the funding become available via the Barnett formula for Wales to be able to provide free tuition to students here in Wales.
Thanks, Murdo.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one there because David said something rather profound about housing, and I think he's absolutely right. That if you look at any performing child in any school who's underperforming, it's often a case, if you go back through their history and the environment they're brought up in can have a major impact on the way that they develop. And I think if we could provide better housing for everyone, it would be a great step forward. And actually, if there was a case for nationalisation, I'd be on housing very quickly. I think that's the place we should invest our national wealth in creating greater quality housing. Having said that, Kevin's just said something that was completely false, which is that student fees, tuition fees, are a barrier to people going to university. The evidence tells us that since the changes that were made in the last government, more children from poorer backgrounds are going to university than ever before, in England at least. And that system is creating a much more progressive basis for people to go to university and doing the thing, which is another profound thing that David said, which is delivering funding and investment into our wonderful higher education establishments and focusing on paying good money for good tuition. And that is so important. So I studied in the UK and had a good experience. I also was lucky enough to study in France for a while. The reality in France is that you have enormous cohorts of people going to university for free, and the teaching is dreadful. It is in many cases a system where you have all comers in. Someone stands at the front. There's plenty of smoking and French kissing in the back, and everyone goes away thinking, well, this was a great day out, rather than what did I learn? Not in every university, perhaps just it was one I was in. But the reality
might be making the case against all that European money that paid for you to go there.
I know. But actually, it taught me something really important, and I think it's lost in the debate on higher education in this country. Is we get used to having fantastic tuition. I do believe that we could do better, and I think David writes on that. Is right on that. We should invest in universities, get great quality teachers, producing fantastic graduates who go on and do wonderful things. And that will only happen if we fund it properly. The problem with the Labour proposal, firstly, it's unprogressive because it basically favours wealthy people to go to university for free. But secondly, it doesn't allow that investment into universities, and it potentially robs universities of a situation they're now comfortable with at a time they're going to be under pressure from our leaving the European Union. And that puts at risk one of our jewels in our national crown. And the reality is that if we do go down that path, the universities, the policy isn't even costed in so much as you have a situation where universities could now launch hundreds of new courses, knowing that the state will pick up the bill for whoever goes to university, and essentially they will have an uncapped amount of money going out the door to universities, or they're going to limit it.
Do you seriously think the current system is actually financially sustainable?
Well, that's a good question. We will see. But the reality is the state will support a lot of graduates going to university in the end. But we should have a fair deal for students, and that's why what we've compromised with in the last government, which was tough. There's no doubt the Liberal Democrats had a really hard time coming to that deal with the Tories last Parliament. But the Conservatives wanted uncapped fees. We managed to put a cap on it. That cap has set repayments at a progressive level when you're above £21,000. And more people from poorer backgrounds than ever before are going to university as a result. It's a proud achievement, actually, and people love to see it as a real disaster for us. But actually, it's great to see the numbers of people going to university from backgrounds that wouldn't have otherwise gone. In Wales, we're doing good things with Kirsty Williams, and we're going to go through the process of focusing on maintenance grants. And for me, I think that is the right approach. But
well, that's something we can agree on. I think the maintenance grants, the government taking away maintenance grants, is a very, very retrogressive step.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything from the panel? Yep.
So something that you touched on, Kevin, was about education at a younger age, so high schools, primary schools, and Alex as well. You mentioned that it was the wealthier who ended up going to university. So is there anything that your parties want to do to try and end this kind of divide and this correlation between wealth and years in education?
Well, I definitely think that it's also important that we take the early years seriously. Lots and lots of, and again, I'm talking mainly in relation to what's happened in England, because obviously lots of these issues have devolved in Wales, but lots and lots of funding has been withdrawn from things like Shaw Star Centres in England, trying to make sure that children who go to school at an early age with far more than just, school books in their bag, carrying a lot of social issues and a lot of the housing issues that we've talked about, which are a real impediment to their education, and also possibly not having that aspirational background behind them. That's a real issue we have to take on by making sure that the early years are invested in. And as I said earlier, I don't think that then segregating children, at the age of 11 is the way forward to try and deal with that issue. We do need to, make sure that we're investing in the quality of education in our schools by making sure we're recruiting high quality teachers. Unfortunately, the spending plans for schools in England in the Conservative manifesto will represent a 7% cut per pupil in real terms over the course of the next Parliament. And they're saying we're giving record amounts of money, but they're not taking into account the numbers of pupils, so it's not a per head figure, and therefore it's meaningless. And one policy I think has been quite successful, I'll give some credit to the Lib Dems on that, was the idea of the pupil premium, which I think has been quite successful, but it can't, you can't take that out of context. If you're reducing overall funding, that's not going to work. It's got to be taken in the context of a real commitment to invest in education.
I mean, I was going to say, I think that's another great success of the coalition, was to bring the pupil premium, and lots of children from poorer backgrounds have benefited. But equally, there's softer things that we can do in schools, and the school meals proposal that we brought through in coalition in England was another fantastic step forward for our society. The idea that the young children get to eat together and have a proper meal. And yet, the sadness I feel when I see the Conservative proposal to get rid of that, because it's just so unnecessary, it's so cruel. Ultimately, we've done that capital investment. Now let's get on with the kids having lunch. Oh, no. I've got a spreadsheet here that says that maybe we'll give them 7p for breakfast instead. And the next thing you know, we're ripping out kitchens from schools. And it's a dreadful way to approach what I think is a much more pastoral side to early years education, bringing kids together from all backgrounds, getting them eat together, getting schools to be that hub, that communal experience, positive experience that we know schools can be. Let's invest in teachers to let that happen. Let's give them the facilities in terms of kitchens and so on, and make sure that we make schools really a positive experience for everyone. Because when you're coming from a very difficult background, the school is a sanctuary where you really can rise up in a way which we should be supporting.
Thank you very much. We are very short of time, so we're going to have to drop one question and move on to the last question from David Abadir.
Thank you. Hi, my name's David. I'd like to quickly give a big congratulations to you, Kevin, who you featured in my exam answer this morning in politics. So, I know that if my grade doesn't go very well, I know exactly where to go. So
I'm afraid to ask what it was about now.
I just said you were my rep. That's
all right.
So I've sat here in this panel for the past 2 hours, I don't know, and I've listened to everything you've all said, right? And I take it on, right? I understand what you're saying, and in 3 months' time, I turn 18. And that means on Thursday, I cannot vote for you. I cannot put a cross next to any of your names because the parliamentary system deems me somewhat not yet ready, right? So what are each of you going to do to make sure that my voice and the voice that everyone, who's 17 and 16 in future years, will make sure that their voices are heard in Parliament?
David Melding.
Well, the Assembly, if I can just talk about that, is in the process of re-establishing a youth parliament, so I think that's quite useful. There's been, a revolution in student councils and other sort of participatory fora, which I think is very important. I certainly think in terms of governance, and this just as in schools, I mean, this would relate to councils that have to, provide lots of youth services and recreational services to the NHS, indeed, don't involve young people enough in, what are seen as relevant services. So, if you leave it up to 54-year-old politicians like me to provide what I think you need, aged just under 18, then it doesn't take a genius to work out that what I think is good for you may not be what you need at all or what you would have asked for. So I think for the relevance of services, it's very important that we involve young people much more. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has participatory rights as one of the core 4 elements of it. And I think you should be challenging politicians and those that are running public services and ask them, well, how are you implementing that aspect of the UN Convention? I think it's very relevant. I have to say, I believe that 16-year-olds should vote. I think that would send a very strong signal about the quality of education services in particular. We need to do an awful lot in the vocational offer, and in answer to how would they sort of even out opportunities and reduce inequalities. Improving vocational education is very, very important for that set of people, I think, and important for our economy. And I think if we allowed 16-year-olds to vote, that's the sort of thing they'd be urging us to do. So, I think it would be good. I'm sure I'd speak for everyone here that the toughest audience usually in an election is when you go to the local high school.
Kevin Brown.
It's a shame that more young people don't vote already, those who are able to vote at age 18, because they really could change the world and they could change the course of this election. And I would say to anyone listening to this, if you have got a vote and you're between the ages of 18 and 25 or whatever, use your vote, because you're half as likely to do so as people aged over 65. And as a result of that, unfortunately, policies tend to get skewed perhaps sometimes towards older age groups and don't take into account sufficiently the interests of young people who, after all, are the future of our country. It's in our manifesto, and I do support the idea of providing votes at 16, not just because it's a kind of fashionable and trendy thing to do, but I've been convinced by the argument that says that if you want more younger people to vote, they need to learn about it whilst they're still in full-time education, and they need good citizenship education to understand, for example, how votes work in the House of Commons when you have a division and you vote aye or no, and the fact that there are no abstentions available other than by this bizarre thing. All those sorts of things. You need a higher level of education so that even Michael could understand how things like the House of Commons work through politics lessons and citizenships lessons in that. I'm only joking, Michael, just pulling your leg. But just on that serious point, I've been convinced by that, so I would favour introducing votes at 16, and I'm sorry you're not voting in this general election, but hopefully next time. And thanks for mentioning me in your exam paper.
Alex Murdoch.
Yeah, we give you the vote, of course. The Liberal Democrats, the liberal side of us is all about freedoms, and there is no more important freedom in a democratic society than the right to vote. And it's wrong that it's withheld from people who I believe have got the ability to fight for our country, ability to drive a car, all sorts of other things. And it is important that people understand that, like some other things, the first time you vote is one of the most important times. Because you set a path of thinking that, going through that process starts you off and focusing on it. And often people tend to vote, similar ways all through their lives. So let's get that process started, particularly Liberal Democrat-minded people who need to, start voting throughout their lives for the Lib Dems. But I will give you a positive note to end on, and that is, I firmly believe you will have a chance to vote within the next 18 to 24 months, because the sort of options we've got at the moment of leadership in this country are not going to survive very long at all. So I suspect we will have a general election again in the coming months, and you'll have your chance to vote quicker than you think.
Michael Dean.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with pretty much everything my three colleagues have just said, which doesn't happen very often in politics, actually. So, yeah, you should have to vote. I mean, in the simplest answer, you should be able to vote this time around. And we obviously will fight to get the vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. And I spent a lot of time sort of going out into schools and stuff as part of my day job and chatting with children of all ages, and actually when they get engaged in politics, it has a real benefit to the discussion in the classroom, and it goes a lot further than that as well. And I went up to Scotland during the independence referendum, and it was so refreshing actually to walk down the streets of Edinburgh and hear young people really engaged in politics, really know what they were talking about. And actually, as a result of that, I think that has gone a long way towards the Scottish people actually getting a really good deal from Westminster, because they are really clued up, they're really switched on with their politics, and that is only a good thing.
Very quickly, David Melding, why can't young people vote then? If you're saying it's a good idea, why is the Prime Minister saying no?
We set the age at 18, and that's traditionally, since 1969 has been where it's set. But certainly the Welsh Conservative Party allows a free vote on this, and I'm not the only Welsh Conservative in the Assembly who supports votes for 16-year-olds, but I mean, there are those in the party that feel 18 is the appropriate age, and that's the debate we're having.
Okay, that brings us to very nearly the end. We are going to very strict 1 minute closing, very strict 1 minute closing statement from each politician here, starting with Kevin Brennan.
Well, I said at the outset that I believed in change for the better, and I think if you want change, if you want a really different pathway from the one that we seem to be set on under the Conservatives, this laissez-faire, free market future outside of the European Union, which Theresa May seems so intent on leading us towards, then I think you should vote Labour at this general election. Obviously, I think you should vote for me here in Cardiff West if you want a future of where you have a more equal society that's more open to the world and more compassionate.
Well, the change that matters most to me and matters most, hopefully, to young people who voted in enormous numbers for Remain is a change in this kamikaze Brexit scenario that we're being faced with, both by Kevin and his party and by David and the Conservatives. That change is so important, it should be considered above all other options in this election. And I encourage people, if you believe in our place in Europe and our international, open-minded, tolerant spirit as a British nation, to vote for the change that we need, which is to take us back into Europe and have a second referendum to make sure we don't end up in a disastrous Brexit. Michael Dean.
Look, Plaid Cymru know we can have a form of government in Westminster, but I really don't think that in today's political climate we need to. Look at Scotland, they've proved that a strong block of SNP MPs go to Westminster and they actually get a real good deal for the people of Scotland. What really matters is the type of MP that you want representing you, whether they're there for you when you need them, whether they actually vote on the key issues that affect you, whether they're going to stand up for Wales during these Brexit negotiations. So you need to decide what sort of MP you want to represent you. Do you want an absentee who's let the constituency down, led by a weak and divided party? Or do you want something new? Do you want a fresh voice? Someone who's actually going to stand up for you in Westminster and is actually going to be the voice you need?
David Melding.
Well, I hope as many of you as possible will vote Conservative at this election. But I really want to end on praise of the democratic system. I think debates like this are really important, and I think we've had an excellent discussion. The Prime Minister said at the start of this campaign that a general election is always a risk, and it should always be a risk because it's a profound choice. It should never be a shoe-in, and you've seen the majesty of the democratic process in that sense, of the options being considered and the electorate having a full choice between two clear options, and those options are Labour and Conservative, and I hope if you've listened to this debate you feel the Conservative option is the strongest way forward.
Thank you very much. So we've heard from Labour, we've heard from the Lib Dems, we've heard from Plaid Cymru, and we've heard from the Conservative Party. That's all we've got time for. Remember, you can continue to get in touch with us. Tweet us at BOLHS_radio using the hashtag BOLGE17. Email us radiostation@bishoplandafter.org. On Thursday, the United Kingdom will go to the polls and vote for who will be the next Prime Minister. We hope that we've given you a little bit more insight into who you should vote for if you are voting.